This last texture we're going to be working on is this building that we have here. And what we want to use is just a portion of this. And this is going to be only a horizontally, or actually vertically seamless texture. So in other words, we'll be tiling it horizontally, but as far as where the seams are and what's going to be seamless, it will just be the vertical seam and not the horizontal seam. And mostly because with a texture like this, it would be difficult to actually have something seamless come out of what we have here. Although there are ways to do it, to blend it, it will look much better with just one way seamless. And it's really going to be the best way to go about this, especially if we're going to be tiling this across to make different types of windows and things like that. So let's just go ahead and get started. One thing we'll notice is that our perspective of this camera view, it makes it very distorted. There's just a couple of new tools we'll be using within Free Transform. One is the perspective tool, which is kind of neat, and that we can fix this, because basically what we want to do is make a square area of just this. And since we have some lens distortion in there, as you can see right here on the edges, where it's not a straight line, there's a little bit of curving in there. There is a few things we need to fix. So let's go ahead, first thing, double click on this layer, so that's no longer locked and that we can transform it. And let's fix our lens correction first, actually. To go to distort, lens correction, and we don't need to do too much with it. We just kind of want to be looking at the way this texture goes out. And I'm just going to do a +1 at this point and click OK. And if I need to later, I can go back and edit a little bit more. But let's take a look at the perspective tool. So let's go to Free Transform. I'm going to go ahead and expand this. And I want to go to and select perspective. Now with perspective, we're going to be able to stretch this out as we would actually see it. And we don't want to do it too much because we are going to still need to, of course, use some of our other tools to sort of fix this little bit of extra skewing that we have here. But this gives us an overall better idea of the texture as a flattened look, like if we're looking dead on front view without any perspective at all. So go ahead and click enter. Now let's do Free Transform again, and this time I'm going to distort it. And right now I'm just kind of eyeballing it, but I can always bring in a guide so we can see just where we're at with these pillars and the different areas. And actually that looks like I eyeballed that almost perfectly. We'll do that top one, just take a look. And that looks like it matches up just about perfect. So I'll hit enter and go ahead and hit view, clear guides. And now let's crop this out and decide exactly where we want things to be. If we take a look at the bottom, we'll notice the slope is a little bit different. So we might need to change that. We could always distort that a little bit differently. Free transform. But before we go ahead and distort that, actually I want to crop it. So hit escape to clear out the tool. But I'm going to just crop out the areas that we want right now, just slimly. I'm not going to go in very far with it because I still want to have some room to work with in case any major changes need to be made. And that looks like it should be good right there. So we'll hit enter. And now Free Transform, right mouse click with the rectangular marquee tool selected, distort, and we'll just pull that down so that this bottom part matches up with this, and we can see this line across the bottom matching up correctly. And we want to make sure we're just pulling it straight down because we have our left and our right distortion all fixed already. So hit enter, and that looks good. I'll just crop that again. And we want to be using this top trim up here. We can see this might not line up perfectly, so I'm going to leave that up just a little right now, and we'll remove the rest of that later. The bottom, we're going to have this gray area sort of extend out, so I'll just bring that in just a tiny little bit. And then of course we're not going to worry about the bricks just yet. So I hit enter, and now let's offset it and take a look and see what else needs to be changed. So we go to other. As far as the vertical, I'm going to hit 0. And like I said before, this is a horizontal seamless. So we have a vertical seam, but of course it is horizontally tiling. Okay, we can see we have, this isn't lined up quite perfectly. So we are going to need to make some changes to that. Although these pillars do seem to line up correctly, it's just that this little section is sort of bending down. So I'm going to cancel, and I'm going to do a little bit of a change in there. Free transform, distort, and I could of course pull that up, but as we can see, that's just going to mess up our lines there. So what we really need to do is warp it. And we just want to warp it just a tiny little bit because we don't want to throw off those straight lines we have in there. We just want to adjust these sides right in this area and hit enter. We're just trying to straighten out a little bit more. It's not going to be perfect. As you notice too, we kind of messed up the edges as well, so we can crop that in because we're starting to get a little bit of a transparency in there. But we want to crop this anyway, just in case we go outside the lines. Okay, the next thing we want to do is go back and offset 0 on the vertical and just do that horizontal. And we can see that's straightened out a lot more where we have that matching up. So it's going to be a lot easier to work with. We just click OK. And now let's go in here and just start removing some of these areas. We need to decide sort of where we're going to go from here and exactly what pieces we're going to be using. As we can see on the bottom, the way this tile is set up, that's not going to look right. So what we might need to do is actually copy from over here and sort of paste that area in there. I'm going to first clear out that guide because we don't need that anymore. And we'll work on this seam first, just through here. I'm not going to worry about connecting these just yet and removing this area, but I just want to go through here and sort of remove that major seam we have. Which do by using the clone stamp tool, setting our hardness a little lower, and our master diameter. So we're going to have a diameter at 30 pixels, and our hardness is set to 31%. So we want to Alt and click just whatever area we want to copy from, and just sort of go along that seam and just remove it. And we want to continue with this seam to match up with that little area there. And I'm just going to keep that lip we have right there right now with that little bit of shadow, because then it matches up more with our left side. But this is something we're going to be using if we're going to create multiple windows. We could of course use this on an isolated object where we just have maybe a single polygon or block with just this texture on it. But mostly I'd like to see this used for something where we can go back and forth with our windows, so we can make a whole wall full of them and something really interesting and neat. Okay, and I'm just going to leave that alone right now. And we'll go back down here to the bottom and just sort of correct that area. And then I'm going to fix our gray area on the bottom. And I'm not really worrying about this trim too much. Select it from the left, because I can just come from over here and sort of correct that. And then the rest of this doesn't really matter because we're going to fix the seam by a different means. So I'm going to zoom out. And before I do that, since this is going to be seamless, we're going to have it tiling back and forth. We don't want any majorly unique things in it. If you're just going to be using this texture by itself on its own and not have it seamless, then it's pretty much already done. We just need to correct a little bit of the color. But since we do want to be repeating it, we want to remove some of this damage we have here on this pillar. So basically what we want to do is just copy from this pillar, which is pretty much intact, and we can use that over here to fill that in. So I'll just select in the center over here and start out what looks like the center on this side. Actually, I have to go one over, and we can just fill in those areas. With our other pillar. We could also copy and paste that in if we wanted to. But I'm just going to work around these lines here. So we just take care of most of that damage. So it doesn't look exactly something that would show up a lot when we're tiling it. And we're just trying to reduce that tiling effect once again, which is a large majority of what we have to do to make these seamless. It's more than just removing the seams, it's removing some of the uniqueness. On this side, we want it to look more like the complete side over here, where it's not so decrepit. We just come in and clone that, and that looks pretty good. And now we want to fix this area down here. Now, using the clone stamp tool is not going to remove that or fix that to how we need it, just because of the way we crop this and the way that things line up. So since we have pretty much a complete sort of diamond here, we can just use the rectangular tool. And I'm going to transform selection because I didn't draw that out perfectly. Okay, hit enter, and now we want to Control C for copy and Control V for paste. And now the move tool, select that up in the toolbar, and we're just going to move this over here. Now this doesn't match up perfect, but we're going to size that in and make it fit. So I want to change our opacity down just a little so we can still see some of our major lines in back. Use the selection tool, free transform, and we'll just bring it up to that edge. And hit enter. And now we can bring our opacity all the way back up. And we want to be using the eraser tool now. And we're just going to erase these edges. So we want a hardness of 0%. And actually we'll bring it up to 10, just have a little bit of hardness. And that diameter of 35 pixels will be fine. We'll just kind of go in there. And these seams should already kind of match up. So we should still be able to see that trim. And we're just sort of removing the new seams we created. But it looks much better now. And now we have another diamond that we'll be able to tile across horizontally without having that tiling look to it. What we might also want to do is grab our clone stamp tool and make this look a little bit different than the other one. So we're just going in here and removing some of this distinctive areas, making sure we're not making a pattern out of it, just so that it looks different than the other one, and something that is not going to be noticeable when it's repeated. Go ahead and zoom out. And we could also fix some of these other areas in here. If you wanted to fix, take a look right here in this part of the pillar, we could grab this area right here and select that. Undo. Making sure we're on the right layer. Alt select, and then we can just go in here and fix that so it looks a little bit better. There we go. And as far as repairing a lot of this little stuff, it might not be necessary. We could bring this down a little bit further so we don't have that overlap. So we'll grab in the center here, alt clicking up on top, and then clicking in the center, and just bring that down, just so that we don't have that same thing all the way across. Although that might be a little bit more distinctive than that. Just undoing, going back and forth, seeing pretty much what you think would create more of a tiling effect. So just make your changes the way you need them. Okay, now we're going to go back up to the top up here. Use our clone stamp tool. We're just going to connect these bits of trim here. Undo. Making sure we're selecting in the center here, Alt click, and then going from the center here, and that way it levels out very nicely. We can go all the way up with it, and we're going to move this blue area here because we don't want it, because that's something that would be hard to clone over to the left, so we're going to use the majority. Grab that section right there. Now we also want to remove it on this side. Of course, with this, we also have trim on this side, so it's whether or not you want to take that and move that over. We could copy and paste it over if we needed to. We still have a little bit of distortion here. This isn't exactly straight. If we grab our ruler or a guide, you'll notice that from the bottom to the top it is off a little. We could always correct that, going back and doing a little bit of distortion if we needed to. But a lot of that is going to happen with a texture like this, and it's really whether or not it'll be fully noticeable, depending how far away you are from that texture. So I'm just going to pretty much remove that area, and if I do feel that I need that trim in there, I can always put that in. I'm going to increase our hardness since we're working with an edge over here. And I'm just focusing on where that red part is, and I'll work on the top in just a sec. Okay, decrease our hardness back down to 10%. Make our diameter around 34. And now we have some of these areas where we created a pattern of the same thing, so we'll just remove those. And now we want to select this trim. We're going to go from the center and remove some of those damaged areas, and just bring that to the side. And doing that all the way at the top, and I did make a little bit of a mistake there, but I can always go back and correct that. And sort of level it out. Since it isn't exactly perfect, like I said, we could go back and line that up. So it really depends on how much work you want to do with the actual image. What we could also do is grab a little bit of trim from the side over here and just replace that whole section if we wanted it perfectly straight, because this is more of a straighter line than the other one. Although if you notice too right here, we do have some dips, and that kind of continues along with that older look that we have as part of this image. Okay, so overall this is looking pretty good right now. And now we're going to offset this back to pretty much where we were before in the beginning and make some other changes. The main change we want to take a look at, in this case, I can't read this writing, and the uses I would have for this texture, no one would really be able to read this writing, so there's no reason to go in and fully correct this, and instead we can make this into a pattern and use it to just sort of copy over, which isn't going to be a problem. If we really wanted to really preserve the writing in here, we could use the clone stamp tool from a blue area and just sort of fill in the areas that are dirtied up. But instead what I'm going to do is actually use the rectangle selection tool, come up from the top here, go through the center, and just select this area right here. Control C to copy, Control V to paste. And now I'm going to use this on the other side. So I want to grab our selection tool again, right mouse click, go to free transform, right mouse click again, and go to flip horizontally, and hit enter. And now we can match this up on the side over here. Take a look. And of course, delete our edges then. So we'll just go in here and using the eraser tool, just sort of delete the edges that we've created. And there we go. Now we have that as more of a pattern and something that we would take and decrease our tiling effect, because that would be the same over each window, that sort of design. We could also go in there and clean up that dirt if you wanted, or you can make that just part of the design where it's a lighter color. So it's really up to you on how much time you want to spend on the texture and how much you feel it needs to be done with it. Okay, now if we take a look at the top here, we might want to sort of delete and crop out that top area, even up to this trim, because we're not going to need this upper part, and if we just have that, it's just going to interfere with what we already have. So I'm going to bring it down to this trim and hit enter and just crop that out entirely because we don't need it. We'll go back to offset, and if there's anything else from that original part, and actually I'm going to hit cancel really quick, and before I offset I should probably merge down our pieces here, because one thing I didn't do was merge that down before. So I'm going to go back to our first layer, go to offset, actually undo that, filter, other, offset, make that a negative value, but I think it's a little bit too far beyond where we're already at. So I'll merge down that top part, and now we are going to have to position this square again, which won't be a problem. So make sure, I guess, that you're merging things down when you have multiple layers. So we just want to line that back up if it's not already lined up good enough as it is, which it looks like it looks pretty good. So Control E to merge that down, and now we're back on our one layer. One thing we might want to correct is the coloration that we have here. It's much darker in this area than it is over here, and that's more of an isolated patch. So what we can actually do is use our elliptical marquee tool and just select this sort of block that we want to darken up or lighten up. Go to feather. I'm going to do 250 pixel feather. Shift L for levels, and I'm going to drag in that first part and just lighten up that area just a little. We don't want to mess with the color too much, because if we bring it in too much and lighten it with this tool, we will adjust the color. And it's more washed out on that left side, so we just want to kind of match. And if you take a look at the difference now, we can see that it's rather large. And now I'm going to have to check and see if that feather was actually too much, because we want to make sure we're not going to the edge. So I'm going to go ahead and offset that and just make sure there's no color change or any seams that we have by butting that up to the edge. And it doesn't look like we've created any. And that should be fine. So if you're going to be doing feather, make sure that you're not feathering too far out where you have it affecting up to the seam. So one thing we could do is, if we were working on that, make sure we center it. So if we centered it, this column right here, and then redid that again with maybe a less feather, depending on the situation, the scene, it might be a little bit easier to work with the levels tool without going into the seams and actually creating new seams. Because what we would be doing is, if we lightened up the area and it hit this seam right here, this edge, well, that would create a seam on this side, because this side is not being affected as this side is. So the last thing we really have to do is go to our filter, other, offset, and just position this texture where we want it to be. And right there should be good. Now, as far as any other maps on this, basically the color map will work fine. And what we can do is pretty much just save that over. Also notice down here too, we might even want to copy that and horizontally flip that over so that looks the same. Maybe change this up a bit so it's a little more random. But there's different little things we can do with it. Let's just go ahead and create that bump map. We'll just copy this, go to Image, Adjustment, Gradient Map, and making sure we have the defaults as we do before. Click OK. And now we can just use this as our bump map. Because we have this dark area in here, which is going to offset all of this, and these areas in here. This can also be used as our diffusion map, and there's nothing really special that we have to do with it. So let's go ahead and load this into a 3D program and see how it looks. Make sure we save these out, and we'll take a look.